Okay, welcome students. Welcome to lecture number 28, where we will be covering module number 5 under subject indirect taxation. So, in this module, as we know, it is introduction to customs duty. We have already seen the basic concept of custom duty, the definitions, the circumstances of levy of customs duty, types of duty, exemption from duty. We have also seen valuation of imported goods and certain problems on valuation of imported goods. So we are only left with valuation of export goods. So today we will be covering valuation of exported goods. Like how do you value exported goods? Now let me tell you all students, as per your syllabus, the valuation of exported goods, you have only theory. In respect of valuation of exported goods, there is no problems. You have only theory. And in case of valuation of imported goods, you have problems. But in case of exported goods, it is totally theory. You do not have problems on this particular concept. So let us move ahead. Valuation of export goods. Now, valuation is essential for export goods even though many products are exempted from export duty under the customs law. Students, like in case of imports, we've seen that there is customs duty when we are importing the goods. And government levies a high custom duty because government wants to restrict the import in India. Similarly, government aims at promoting the exports because when the exports are being promoted, okay, the business in India is increasing. Since goods from India are moving outside India, the foreign currency is coming into India. Therefore, government wants to promote the exports. So, in order to promote the exports, government has exempted many products that even if they are exported, no custom duty will be levied. And only on few products which the government thinks that it shouldn't be exported, okay, or it should be exported in limited quantities, uh, customs duty is levied only on those products. Now, importance of valuation of export goods. Why is export uh, valuation of export goods that very important? Because of duty drawback, because of export incentives like PB license to get a refund of SINVAT credit and payment of duty on exports if any. Now this is very important students, which means that exported goods are valued because some exporters students, some persons who are exporting the goods, if they get a license, okay, export license, then they can easily claim for uh, the credit on their purchases. See, suppose if I'm exporting a particular product, now to manufacture that product, I need to purchase certain raw materials. So when I'm purchasing the raw materials, I need to pay maybe I need to pay GST or the taxes applicable on that particular product. Now, when I'm exporting, okay, I will get the refund of the taxes that I've already paid because I have an export license, okay, where it is clearly uh, evitable that I am exporting the goods. Secondly is whatever duties I have to pay on export, okay, we will come to know whether it has been exempted or whether it is been chargeable to customs duty. So therefore only when you value the export goods, that time you can claim for the export license, you can take the credit of the purchases that you have made, you can derive at the amount or determine the amount on which you have to pay export duty only when you know the value of it. Next, to value the exported goods, we have different rules, as we have seen rules in case of imported goods. Similarly, for export goods also, we have certain valuation rules under customs. So, rule we have totally 8 rules. That is rule number 1 to rule number 8. Now, in short, just let me explain these rules. Rule number 1, where it says that custom valuation determination of value of export goods rule 2007. Rule number 1 says that customs valuation has to be done as per the rules of 2007, which determines the value of exported goods, not imported goods, exported goods. Rule number 2 talks about the different basic important definitions which we need to know before we study the rule. Rule number 3 says that assessable value is equal to the transaction value. Rule number 4 says that assessable value is equal to the transaction value of goods of like kind and quality. Now, in detail about these rules, we will be seeing in the succeeding slide. Rule number 5 says that if rule number 3 is not available, or you can't ascertain the assessable value as per rule number 3, then go to rule number 4. If still you cannot, then go to rule number 5, which is computed value method, or go to rule number 6, that is residual method, and 7 and 8. Students, whenever you apply rule number 3, after that you have to go to rule number 7 directly. So in rule number 3, when you determine the value as a transaction value, you have to declare that value, okay, to the custom authorities. And who's going to declare the value? The exporter, who is exporting the goods. So after rule 3, you will directly jump to rule 7, where you will be declaring the value, okay, to the custom authorities. Suppose if the custom authorities accepts the value, then your valuation will end there. Suppose if it rejects the value, like in rule number 8, the exporter's value which is declared can be rejected by the custom authorities. So in rule number 8, it is rejection of declared value by the custom authorities. Now if in rule number 8 the value is being rejected, then you can move back to the rule number 4, that is assessable value is equals to transaction value of goods of like kind and quality. Again, after determining the value as per rule number 4, you have to jump to rule number 7, where you have to declare the value. Then again, it depends on the custom authorities whether he accepts or rejects. If he rejects, it will again go to rule number 8, and then you need to go again to rule number 5, and so on. So remember, you need to apply rule 3 to 6 in a chronological order. You cannot move to any order which you like. You have to always value the export goods in this order itself. So rule 3 to rule 6 will give you the value of exported goods. In that order, you have to follow it. So let us in detail see what this all the rules states. So rule number 1, as I told, these rules may be called the Custom Valuation Rules 2007. Rule number 1 says that there are certain rules which are framed which will help to determine the value of exported goods, and they shall come into force on 10th day of October 2007. So these rules were framed in 2007, and they came into effect, or they came into force from October 10, 2007. And this rules shall only apply to export goods, students. So they shall apply only to export goods. So rule number 1 says that there are certain sets of rule, that is 2007, which were framed to value the exported goods, and they will apply only to exported goods. Rule number 2 talks about certain important definition. I've just covered 2 important definitions here. And likewise, when we move to the different rules, I will be telling the meaning of different kind of terms. So the important definitions which is covered in rule number 2 are goods of like kind and quality. So what does this mean, goods of like kind and quality? It means that export goods which are identical or similar in physical characteristics, quality and reputation as the goods being valued, and perform the same function or are commercially interchangeable with the goods being valued, produced by the same person or a different person. So when I say goods of like kind and quality, in short, it means similar goods, or it means substitute goods. Okay. So this is the simple definition of goods of like kind and quality. This we have already seen when we did valuation of imported goods, but I'm just going through the rules of valuation of exported goods, where this term is the same in case of imported goods as well as exported goods. Next, transaction value. Transaction value means the value of export goods within the meaning of subsection 1 of section 14 of the Customs Act 1962. So, in my some uh, previous lectures, I have told you that the transaction value under section 14, subsection 1 means the value price actually paid or payable on the sale of the goods. Correct. So, this is the meaning of transaction value given as per rule number 2. So, these are some few definitions which has been covered under rule number 2. So rule number 1 says that you can determine the value of imported goods by applying the rules of 2007 in case of exported goods. Next, rule number 2 says talks about some definitions, important definitions. Next, rule number 3. Rule number 3 is determination of the method of valuation. So we saw that in rule number 3, the assessable value will be the transaction value. Now, subject to rule number 8. Now, what is rule number 8, students? Rejection of value by the custom authorities. They are rejecting the value. So, that is why they are using subject to rule number 8. That is, if in rule number 8 the value is being rejected, then you can move to rule number 4. So, subject to rule number 8, the value of export goods shall be the transaction value. So, always the value of exported goods is going to be the transaction value unless and until such value is been rejected by the custom authorities under rule number 8. Now, the transaction value shall be accepted even where the buyer and seller are related, provided that the relationship has not influenced the price. So, students, in case of imports, we have seen that the transaction value cannot be the assessable value cannot be accepted as transaction value if the buyer and seller are related. But in case of exports, the transaction value you can take the assessable value as a transaction value even if the buyer and seller are related. But the important point here is the buyer and seller should whatever price they're transacting transaction is happening at whatever price, that price should not be influenced. It should be the same price as you would as the seller would give to an unknown buyer. Related means he's a known buyer. Same price what he's charging to an unknown buyer, if he's charging to the known buyer, okay, then the transaction value can be accepted even if the seller and buyer are related. So that relation what they have, that should not have any impact on the price. So that is what is mentioned in rule number 3. Next, if the value cannot be determined under the provisions of subrule 1 and subrule 2, the value shall be determined by proceeding sequentially through rules 4 to 6. This I have already told you all, that suppose if as per rule 3 the assessable value is a transaction value, and if this value is not accepted, if this value is not accepted, then you can move to rule number 4 to rule number 6 in a sequential order, in a chronological order. Next, now we saw that the assessable value is going to be the transaction value as per rule number 3. So now let us see what is the transaction value. Still I'm continuing with rule number 3 only, students, where I've told you all that the assessable value is the transaction value. Now let us understand what is transaction value. For the purpose of calculation of export duty, the transaction value, that is to say that the price actually paid or payable for the goods for the delivery at the time and place of exportation under section 14 of Customs Act 1962 shall be the FOB price of such goods at the time and place of exportation. So what does this mean? We know that the transaction value is the price actually paid or payable where at the place of exportation. So suppose if we are exporting the goods from India, so what is the place of exportation? India. Okay, so as per section 14, transaction value is the price actually paid or payable. Now, under this, how do we calculate? As we have seen in case of imported goods, what was the transaction value? Transaction value was CIF, that is cost, insurance, and freight. How did we derive at CIF? That was FOB plus freight and plus insurance. How we derived our FOB, that is FAS, correct? So what we need to plus all this local insurance, local freight, we got FAS. Now, how do we derive at the assessable value in case of exported goods? So on the same lines, assessable value for exported goods is nothing but free on board, that is FOB. So up to bringing the goods on the board, okay, up to bringing the goods on the port, what is the charges, what is the cost, that is the value for exported goods. So in case of imported goods, we saw that all the cost from the exporting country to the up to where the importation is completed, all that cost was coming in the value. But in case of exported goods from India, what all costs should be included? Only those figures or cost has to be included up to bringing the goods to the custom port or on the board. Only that value has to be included. Once it is left for exportation, once it crosses the territorial waters of India, whatever cost is there, that has to be ignored. So, in case of assessable value, in case of exported goods, the transaction value is nothing but your FOB, that is free on board. Now, let us understand in case of exported goods, what is free on board? Okay, what do you mean by free on board? So, free on board means all expenditures incurred by exporter up to the point of loading the goods into the vessel or aircraft or vehicle is incurred by the exporter, and hence from importer's point of view it is free on board. So in short, FOB is nothing but where the goods are brought by the exporter up to the ship or vehicle through which the exportation is going to happen, the means of transport through which the exportation is going to happen. So up to loading the goods into the vehicle, sorry, into the vessel, aircraft, okay, whatever expenditure is incurred, it means FOB. So in case of valuation of exported goods, the assessable value is just going to be FOB. And what is FOB? Bringing the goods, okay, from the place of where of manufacture or wherever, from there up to loading the goods in the means of transport through which it is going to be transported. It can be vessel, aircraft, vehicle, anything. Next, in case of imports, we saw what is the rate of foreign exchange we need to consider by solving the problems, correct? Similarly, in case of exports, the rate of exchange of the CBIC as in force on the date on which a shipping bill or bill of export, as the case may be, is presented under Section 50 of the Customs Act 1962 is applicable. So again, what is the rate of exchange that you need to consider in case of exports is nothing but the rate as declared by the uh, CBIC, that is Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. Now, what is this shipping bill or bill of export? It is nothing but a document, okay, which is required to be filled by the exporter, okay, and which is presented by the exporter to the custom authorities to allow the shipment of the goods, okay. So, in short, it is nothing but it is the details of exports which needs to be filled by the exporter and need to be submitted to the custom authorities. Once the bill of export or shipping bill is being submitted, the custom authorities will allow for the shipment. So same as we saw in case of imports also we saw. Similarly, we are seeing bill of export in case of bill of import as we saw in case of imports. Similarly, we have shipping bill or bill of exports in case of exports. So again, what is the rate of exchange that you need to consider in case of exports is as determined by CBIC. And do not consider any interbank exchange rates or any exchange rates that is being set by the foreign currency dealers. Okay, but take as suggest as notified by the CBIC. Next, so rule number 3, we saw the assessable value is nothing but the FOB. Okay, that is a transaction value. Now, this rule number 3, the exporter will declare it as per the rule number 7, and if it is rejected in rule number 8 by the custom authorities, that whatever value is being taken, if the custom authority is not satisfied with that value, he will reject it. Then what you will do? Then the exporter has to move to rule number 4. Rule number 4 says you have to determine the value by comparison. So determination of export value by comparison. So let us see this. The value of export goods shall be based on the transaction value of the goods of like kind and quality exported at or about the same time to other buyers in the same destination country of importation, or in its absence another destination country of importation adjusted in accordance with the provision of subrule 2. So students, what is this telling? That suppose if the value is as per rule number 3, the value has been rejected. Then the exporter will jump to rule number 4, where he has to take the value of the goods that is exporting as a value, as such a value, which is a value of a like kind and quality. Means, suppose if he's exporting a product which is the substitute of that product, which is same in its characteristics, physical presence, everything is same functions, and what is the value of that particular goods, he has to take the same value for the goods that he is exporting, provided those goods are going to the same country, same destination, or some another destination. Okay, first he has to see the value of those goods that are similar goods which are going to the same destination. If not, then he has to see the same goods going to some other destination. Next, then what they're telling, in determining that value, in determining the value of like kind and quality, there are certain adjustments that need to be made. What are those adjustments? We can see in rule number 4, subrule 2. This is subrule 1, subrule 2. So let us see. In determining the value of export goods under subrule 1, the proper officer shall make such adjustments as appear to him reasonable, taking into consideration the relevant factors including difference in date of exportation, difference in commercial levels and quantity levels, difference in composition, quality, design between the goods to be assessed and the goods for which they are being compared, difference in domestic freight and insurance charges depending on the place of exportation. Now, students, I have told you that as per rule number 4, you need to take the value as the value of similar goods of like kind and quality. Correct? Now, the assessing officer, now again in rule number 4, whatever value you are taking, that you have to declare in rule number 7. Okay, and then the proper officer or custom officer will assess that value, will check whether that value is correct or not, but he will check that value based on the following factors. That he will see whether the dates of exportation of similar goods of like kind and quality, whether it was happening in that same period, or whether you have taken two very old goods which were exported some 5 years back. So he will see the differences in the date, whether there is a major difference in the date that you have considered, and he will see the difference. He will consider this point, students. He will see whether the commercial level and quantity levels are same. You cannot compare 500 suppose grams of goods with suppose uh, 1 kg of goods. So the quantity levels also has to be same, because if the quantity is same, the value will be same. If more or less quantity, the value will differ. So when the proper officer wants to accept or reject the value, he will consider these factors. Similarly, he will consider the quality, the design, the composition of the goods of which you are comparing, and also the freight and insurance charges will be compared. So will be compared and will be considered by the proper officer in making sure whether he should accept the value that is being declared by exporter in rule number 4, or he should reject. So simple rule number 4 says that if rule number 3 is not applicable, you take the value of exported goods as a value of like kind and quality which has been exported at about the same time. Okay, either to same buyer, either to other buyer, either to the same destination or some other destination. Next. Rule number 5 says that if rule number 4 also has been rejected by the proper officer as per rule number 8, Then you go to rule number 5, it says that computed value method. So what is computed value method, students? If the value cannot be determined under rule number 4, it shall be based on a computed value which shall include the following: cost of production, manufacture or processing of export goods, charges if any for the design or brand, and amount towards profit. So what they are telling, suppose rule number 4 also you cannot determine the value, what you need to do is simply add three things and get the value. Like what is the cost of producing those goods? So what is the cost of manufacturing those goods or processing the goods? Then if you are designing the goods or creating a brand for the goods, what are those charges plus your profit? So you need to add the three elements and get the value on which you can calculate the export duty. So rule number 5 is computed value method, where you will add three things in order to get the value of exported goods, that is cost of production, charges, and the percentage of profit. Next, rule number 6 is residual method. Now, residual method is a method where we have already seen you will use a reasonable means. Suppose if rule number 3 to rule number 5 is not being, you cannot determine the value. So, based on whatever provisions we have seen for export goods, you have the exporter has to use some reasonable, consistent basis for which he has to calculate the value. Okay. Now, subject to the provisions of Rule 3, where the value of export goods cannot be determined under the provisions of Rule 4 and 5, the value shall be determined using reasonable means consistent with the principles and general provisions of these rules, provided that the local market price of export goods may not be the only basis for determining the value of export goods. So, students, rule number 6 is residual method. You will come to this method only at the last, where none of the methods, none of the rules are applicable. Then you will jump to rule number 6 at the last, where the exporter himself will calculate the value using certain reasonable basis. Okay, by whatever provisions are covered in different rules, considering all those provisions on reasonable basis, he will try and calculate the value on which the export duty is to be calculated. Rule number 7, as I've already explained, declaration by the exporter. The exporter shall furnish a declaration relating to the value of export goods in a manner specified in this behalf. That means, as per whichever rule he is calculating the value, assessable value on which export duty has to be calculated, whatever value he is determining, that has to be first declared by the exporter and submitted to the custom authorities or proper officer. So that declaration happens as per rule number 7. Now, rule number 8 is rejection of declared value. When the proper officer has reasons to doubt the truth or accuracy of the value declared in relation to any export goods, he may ask the exporter of such goods to furnish further information, including documents or other evidence if after receiving such further information or in the absence of a response from such exporter, the proper officer still has reasonable doubt about the truth or accuracy of the value so declared, the transaction value shall deem to have not been determined in accordance with the rule number 3. Okay, at the request of an exporter, the proper officer shall intimate the exporter in writing the ground for doubting the truth or accuracy of the value declared in relation to the export goods by such exporter and provide a reasonable opportunity of being heard before taking a final decision under subrule 1. So, rejection, when will a custom authority or proper officer, when will he reject the value? When he's feeling that the value that is being declared is not correct, is inaccurate. So if he's doubting the value, suppose if I'm a proper officer, I'm doubting a value that is declared by the exporter, then I will ask the exporter, please give me further documents which will prove that the value what you have declared is correct. Suppose if the exporter responds after responding, suppose he gives me all the documents which I further want to investigate, and after receiving those documents, if I still feel that no, the value declared is incorrect, then I will reject the value. But I will reject the value. I have the right to reject the value only when I've given the exporter an opportunity of being heard. Like first, I have, before taking a final decision of rejecting the value, I have to hear to the explanation that has to be given by the exporter. Secondly, I have the reasons for which I have rejected the value. I have to mention that reasons in writing and give it to the exporter, because just I cannot reject any value. I have to give proper reason. Being a proper officer, you have to give reasons for why you have rejected the value. What are the reasons for rejection of the value? And only after the exporter is being heard, then only final decisions can be taken. So the proper officer cannot just reject any value. He has to give reasoning in writing. He has to give opportunity to be heard from the exporter, and then only he can reject the value. So this was rule number 8, that is rejection of declared value. Next, presently the following goods are subject to customs duty. So these are certain goods which are subject to export duty, and the rate of duty is also is mentioned. So luggage leather is 25% rate of export duty, hide skin and leather 15%, skin and lamb skin 10%, steel products is 15%, iron ores 300 per metric ton, and chromium ores, that is 2000 per metric ton. So these are certain few goods which are subject to export duty, and the rate also is mentioned. Okay, so these are few examples which are subject to export duty. Now, refund of export duty. Refund means whatever export duty you are being, uh, whatever export duty you are paying. Okay, you can claim a refund of that. So once you have made a payment of export duty, you can claim the refund of that. But in what situations are you to claim the refund of it? So refund of export duty is permissible in the following circumstances, subject to the satisfaction of certain conditions. Okay, number one, goods are re-imported within 1 year from the date of export. So, see, students, goods are re-imported within 1 year from the date of export. So, suppose if you're exporting certain goods, okay, and you're re-importing it. This, suppose if you're exporting some some amount of goods, and that same goods you are re-importing. So at the time of export, you have paid export duty. But if you're bringing back the same goods into India within 1 year, then whatever duty you have paid, you can get a refund of it. Okay. So in case of goods are re-imported within 1 year from the date of export, these goods are not for resale. So if the goods whatever you are exporting are not for resale, then you can claim a refund of export duty. Next, refund claim is lodged within 6 months from the date of clearance by custom officer for re-importation. So whatever refund claim, you whatever amount of export duty you want to refund, if within 6 months it has to be lodged, if it is for a re-importation, and that 6 months will be calculated from the date when the custom authorities have cleared it for re-importation. So very important, refund claim you have to lodge within 6 months. It is not that, suppose you have re-imported goods within 1 year, so you know that you can take the refund of export duty, but you have certain time period up to which you can claim the refund. You cannot claim the refund after 5 years for this particular export duty that you have paid. So this refund claim is lodged within 6 months from the date of clearance by custom officer for re-importation. So is being uh, if this particular thing is being condition is being fulfilled, then only you can claim the refund of export duty. First of all, the goods which are goods should be re-imported. The same goods what you're exporting should be re-imported within 1 year, and this goods should not be again for resale. And number three, that this refund claim should be lodged only within 6 months. 6 months from what? From the date that the goods are cleared by the custom authorities for re-importation. So this we saw valuation of customs, uh, valuation of customs relating to exported goods. So today we seen valuation of exported goods. This is a complete theory. There is no problems on valuation of exported goods. So thank you so much, students.